What drives a man to betray his homeland and gamble everything on a voyage into the unknown? Why would a Portuguese nobleman seek favor from the Spanish crown to sail west, chasing a route to the east? Ferdinand Magellan, or Ferdinand Magellan as history knows him, dared to defy expectations and the limits of his era. His journey starts not with glory, but with exile and determination, a choice that would ignite a chain of irreversible events. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Born in the late 15th century, around the year 1480, in the quiet village of Sabrosa, amid vineyards and olive groves, young Magellan's world was humble but steeped in honor. His family belonged to the minor nobility, respected but far from wealthy, bound by duty and the fragile pride of their rank. His father, Rodrigo, served as a royal tax collector, a man of order, while his mother, Alda de Mesquita, came from a respected local lineage, granting Ferdinand access to a solid education that many could only dream of. From an early age, Magellan was immersed in learning. He mastered reading and writing, arithmetic, and devout Latin prayers taught by the village priest. But his imagination was fueled not only by books. It was the stories carried by traders and soldiers passing through Sabrosa that ignited a restless thirst for distant lands. Tales of rich spices, golden realms, and people with strange gods planted the seed of adventure deep in his heart. At about 12 years old, Magellan was sent to serve at the court of Queen Dowager Eleanor of Viseu in Lisbon, stepping into a world of intrigue and rigid etiquette. Here the boy from a quiet village encountered the grandeur and harsh realities of noble life, politics, power, and the restless ambitions of an empire at its peak. This harsh new environment was his crucible, shaping him with lessons in swordsmanship, horsemanship, geography, astronomy, and the art of navigation, all vital skills for anyone dreaming of conquering the seas. Lisbon in those days was alive with the thunder of sails and the scent of exotic spices. The city buzzed with news of daring explorers like Bartolomeo Diaz, who had rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and Vasco da Gama, who had reached India's shores. King Manuel I dreamed of dominating the Indian Ocean, and young Magellan absorbed every detail, his eyes fixed on the horizon where maps ended and mystery began. By his mid-20s, Magellan was no longer just a student of the sea. He became a soldier and sailor, entrusted to the fleet of Francisco de Almeida, the first viceroy of Portuguese India. Their mission was clear: to cement Portugal's grip on the spice trade and fortify its empire with iron and blood. The fleet sailed across the vast Atlantic, rounded Africa's southern tip, and pressed onward through treacherous passages until reaching the western shores of India. Here, Magellan faced his first true trials, tested by the brutal realities of colonial warfare and the unforgiving ocean. But the tides of loyalty were shifting beneath his feet. Magellan's daring spirit clashed with the rigid Portuguese crown, and soon disillusionment took root. Rejecting the path laid before him, he turned to Spain, proposing the unthinkable: a voyage westward to reach the east, crossing seas no European had dared to sail. What desperation or vision drove him to place his fate in the hands of a foreign queen? And how did he convince King Charles I to bet on his audacious plan? The voyage began under a cloud of suspicion and unrest. Mutiny erupted almost immediately, testing Magellan's resolve and leadership. The men aboard his ships faced starvation, storms, and the ghostly silence of a vast Pacific Ocean. Yet, through sheer will and unyielding determination, Magellan's expedition discovered the strait that now bears his name, a narrow, winding passage that forever redrew the maps and opened the world to a new age of exploration. But triumph was not to be his reward. Magellan did not live to see the completion of his journey. His death in the Philippines plunged the crew into chaos, threatening to unravel everything they had fought for. Ships were lost, crews decimated, and hope waned. Only one vessel would survive to return to Spain, carrying the staggering proof that the world was round, vast, and interconnected in ways no one had imagined. This is a story of human fear and unyielding courage, of decisions that sealed fates beyond recall, and of a man whose dream reshaped history despite betrayal, hardship, and death. The saga of Magellan's circumnavigation is the echo of the impossible becoming real, a testament to the relentless pursuit of discovery. If you crave more tales of monumental choices and world-changing journeys, subscribe to Quiet History. Here, every day, we bring you stories that linger long after the last word is spoken. What drives a man to risk everything for recognition? How far will he go when his homeland turns its back on him? Ferdinand Magellan found himself caught in a storm of ambition and rejection, a man shaped by battle, but betrayed by court politics. Magellan's early years in India were marked by a relentless conflict. He fought fierce naval battles against Moorish ships, escorted trading caravans along the Malabar coast, and defended key Portuguese factories in Cananore and Cochin. With every mission, he grasped a brutal truth. Real power belonged to those who controlled the fleet. Yet, despite his growing expertise, his rise was far from assured. In 1510, Magellan joined the expedition of Afonso de Albuquerque, a ruthless strategist who seized Goa and crowned it the capital of Portuguese India. The city of Malacca, the jewel controlling trade between China, Java, and India, became their next target. The siege was merciless. Streets barricaded, every building fiercely defended. Magellan was gravely wounded, pierced by a spear in the leg, a wound said to have haunted him for life and caused a permanent limp. Yet in the chaos he remained unshaken, his courage and composure a beacon amid the bloodshed. His valor did not go unnoticed. He received slaves, spoils of war, and formal thanks from his commanders. But promotion? That prize eluded him. Returning to Portugal after 3 grueling expeditions, Magellan was a seasoned veteran with unparalleled knowledge of navigation and colonial politics. But his homeland greeted him with indifference. Instead of honors, his wages were cut, new posts were withheld. When he requested a deserved raise and recognition for his service in Malacca, he was flatly denied. A gnawing sense of injustice took root. The empire that Magellan risked life and limb for seemed blind to his sacrifices. By 1513, after campaigns across India and Southeast Asia, Magellan returned to a cold court. King Manuel I favored noble-born commanders, sidelining capable officers like Magellan, whose provincial and impoverished noble lineage left him without powerful patrons. His expertise counted for little in a system where influence outweighed skill. The strain boiled over in 1514 during a Moroccan campaign when Magellan was wounded again. Seeking compensation for his injury, he clashed with court bureaucracy. Accused, though not proven guilty, of disobeying orders over horse supplies, he became entangled in damaging investigations. The shadow of suspicion further isolated him. Despite mounting obstacles, Magellan fought to clear his name. He submitted petitions, cited battlefield achievements, and pleaded his case. But his voice was drowned out by rivals more favored by royal power. Each rejection deepened his alienation. Then came the fateful year, 1517. After yet another denial, Magellan made a choice few dared. He turned his back on Portugal. He offered his talents to Spain, the restless rival eager to stake its claim in the New World. This was no mere change of allegiance. It was a gamble with destiny. Magellan's decision would ignite a chain of irreversible events, entangling him in ambitions far greater than any he had known. A voyage that would etch his name into the annals of history or doom him to oblivion. What drove Magellan to abandon his homeland? Was it ambition, desperation, or a burning need to prove his worth? The answers lie buried in the shadowed corridors of power and the unrelenting tides of fate. Subscribe to Quiet History to uncover the harrowing saga of a man who dared to challenge the world, and the price he paid for it. What does it take to command a fleet when loyalty is fractured? How do you lead men who refuse to follow? Ferdinand Magellan faced a crew reluctant to sail under a foreigner's command, Castilian sailors who resented his authority. To fill the ranks, he had to recruit a patchwork of men: Andalusians, Basques, Galicians, Flemish, Italians, and a handful of outcast Portuguese like himself. Among them were volunteers and condemned men granted clemency in exchange for service. The total crew numbered roughly 240 souls, each carrying their own fears and doubts. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that threatened to tear the expedition apart before it even left port. Tensions ran highest among the captains appointed by the Council of the Indies. Juan de Cartagena, commanding the San Antonio, was no mere captain. He was the crown's watchdog, and his disdain for Magellan was evident from the start. Gaspar de Quesada and Luis de Mendoza, leading other ships, believed the expedition's leadership rightfully belonged to Castilians. None embraced Magellan's vision as their own. Their opposition simmered quietly, a dangerous undercurrent. Meanwhile, Rui Falero, initially the second in command, was unraveling mentally, gripped by fits of rage and deep depression. His removal left Magellan isolated, but with unchallenged authority. The weight of command settled heavily on his shoulders. Magellan knew the stakes. Without unity, the voyage would fail before it began. He took personal charge of inspections, negotiations, and officer selections. Among the crew was Antonio Pigafetta, a Venetian helmsman destined to become the expedition's chronicler. Also aboard was Juan Sebastián Elcano, a Basque merchant captain drowning in debt, seeking redemption. Though his role was minor then, Magellan kept him close in mind as a potential reserve officer. Navigational instruments were meticulously procured: astrolabes, compasses, quadrants, hourglasses, and secret maps reserved for the highest command. Accuracy was paramount. One miscalculation could mean disaster in uncharted waters. The pressure to succeed was suffocating. In August of 1519, the fleet departed Seville, drifting slowly down the Guadalquivir River. Sailors slept on deck, ships waited for tides, and the city watched anxiously. For nearly a month they lingered in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, finalizing preparations and awaiting favorable winds. Here Magellan held his last council with the captains. His voice carried no threats, only unwavering resolve. He spoke of duty, the crown's trust, the preciousness of each sailor's life, and above all, discipline, without which the journey was impossible. The response was cold. Some officers listened silently, harboring quiet rebellion. The fragile unity was a powder keg, waiting for a spark. Then, on the morning of September 20th, 1519, under the tolling of bells and prayers whispered by gathered townsfolk, 5 ships slipped from the docks into the open Atlantic. Castilian flags fluttered atop masts, holds packed with sacks of flour, ropes, weapons, and barrels of water. On board were men whose names history had yet to remember, except one. Only Magellan knew the earth's edge they sought, the perilous path ahead. The voyage would stretch nearly 3 years, culminating in the first circumnavigation of the globe. But at that moment, hope and dread sailed side by side, each breath heavy with uncertainty. The first weeks passed with deceptive calm. Favorable winds pushed the fleet forward, provisions held steady, and the ships maintained tight formation. The sailors, still unbroken by the claustrophobia of the holds or the monotony of their rations, clung to their fighting spirit. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered, loyalties divided, tempers frayed, and the unknown horizon loomed like a silent judge. Every decision, every command, carried irreversible consequences. The voyage was no longer just a journey. It was a crucible of human fear, defiance, and the relentless pursuit of destiny. Will Magellan's iron will be enough to hold this fragile alliance together? Can a man cast out by his own countrymen command the loyalty of a fractured crew? The answers lie ahead, in the vast, unforgiving ocean where every choice could mean survival or doom. The story of this expedition is not just about discovery. It is a testament to the cost of ambition and the price of irreversible decisions. Subscribe to Quiet History to witness the unfolding saga of courage and betrayal on the edge of the known world. What drives men to challenge the unknown with nothing but hope and steel? How far can human endurance stretch before breaking under pressure? As Magellan's fleet hugged the southern coast of Africa, the vastness of the Atlantic lay ahead like an abyss. They pressed forward relentlessly, undeterred by the endless ocean's cruel indifference. By the time November rolled in, the expedition finally touched the shores of South America, a new world full of promise and peril. But was this truly the dawn of discovery, or a prelude to disaster? December arrived, and the fleet found refuge in a picturesque bay at the mouth of a river that would one day bear the name Rio de Janeiro. Magellan allowed the ships to anchor, granting the crews a brief yet vital respite. Repairs were made, water and fresh provisions were gathered, and trade with the indigenous people flourished. Knives, mirrors, and fabrics exchanged hands for fruits, meat, fish, and wood. The fleeting harmony masked the underlying tension, an uneasy calm in the eye of the storm. Yet, beneath this fragile peace, The true test was just beginning. January of 1520 marked a turning point. The explorers reached the estuary of the Rio de la Plata, their eyes searching desperately for a passage westward. The wide bay, brackish waters, and strong currents sparked hope. Could this be the gateway they sought? But hope was crushed as reality set in. This was no passage, but a dead end. The weight of disappointment settled heavily on the fleet as Magellan ordered them onward into the uncharted and unforgiving southern latitudes. The coastline grew harsher, the winds sharper, and the skies more volatile, and the margins for error shrank dangerously thin. By March, autumn gripped the southern hemisphere, and the expedition found a deep, sheltered harbor known later as San Julian. Facing the brutal onset of storms and dwindling supplies, Magellan made a fateful decision: to winter here. It was a calculated risk, but one that fractured the fragile unity among the men. Fatigue gnawed at their spirits, hunger sharpened tempers, and discontent simmered into defiance. Magellan's authority was no longer absolute. Whispers of mutiny began stirring in the shadows. The seeds of rebellion sprouted in the hearts of the fleet's captains: Juan de Cartagena of the San Antonio, Gaspar de Quesada, commanding the Concepcion, and Luis de Mendoza of the Victoria. Cartagena's loyalty had long been suspect, his claim that a Portuguese man could not command Spanish ships fueling the insurrection. Isolated in the bay, the mutineers seized their chance. Under the cover of night, they raised the banner of defiance. Orders were ignored, alliances shattered, and on the Victoria, Mendoza ousted the officer loyal to Magellan. The fragile balance of power teetered on the edge of chaos. Magellan, commanding only the Trinidad and Santiago, refused to yield. He struck with ruthless precision. In the dead of night, his loyal officers, Juan Serrano and Gomez de Espinosa, boarded the Victoria with armed men, catching the mutineers off guard. The violent struggle ended with Mendoza dead and control of the Victoria reclaimed. This was no mere skirmish. It was a turning point. The mutiny quashed, Magellan's grip tightened once more, but the cost had been paid in blood and broken trust. The next day, with swift and brutal tactics backed by the threat of artillery, Magellan regained control over the remaining ships. Cartagena and Quesada were arrested and faced a military tribunal, a grim reminder that in this merciless voyage, discipline was survival. Quesada, silent and cold, stared at the endless blue horizon. Then, in a voice heavy with irony and hope, he uttered a name that would echo through history: Mar Pacifico, the Pacific Ocean, peaceful sea. Not for its calm waters, but because after mutiny, shipwreck, and betrayal, peace itself was a rare miracle. No one aboard knew that the days ahead would be anything but peaceful. The long and agonizing months of crossing the vast ocean were just beginning. Yet, in this fleeting moment of victory, the weight of their choices bore down. The discovery of the strait was real, the passage found and conquered where none had before. The great ocean stretched before them, a silent expanse promising both salvation and doom. When the three surviving ships slipped through the southern strait carved by Magellan's daring, the world held its breath. What awaited them beyond the horizon was unknown, a vastness unmatched, challenges unimaginable. The voyage was far from over. It was a relentless test of will, courage, and fate itself. The ocean had been crossed, but the true journey was only beginning. Subscribe to Quiet History to witness the untold stories of human courage and consequence, where every choice shapes destiny and every horizon hides a new trial. What happens when the most relentless enemy isn't a raging storm or an enemy ship, but time itself? When silence and exhaustion gnaw slowly, mercilessly at every ship, every soul aboard. The hardest phase of the voyage began, not with battle cries, but with the crushing weight of endless days at sea. At first, the ocean greeted them with eerie calm. No hurricanes, no squalls, no towering waves to batter their wooden vessels. The wind blew steady, the course was held true, and the sailors, hardened veterans of the Atlantic's cruel whims, mistook this unnatural stillness for a blessing. The first week passed as smoothly as anyone could have hoped. But beneath the calm, a darker truth was brewing. Not a single bird soared overhead. No clouds drifted by. No fragrant hints of land teased their senses. The sun hung high, merciless and unchanging. Heat baked the decks. Fresh water spoiled under the blistering sun. Provisions dwindled faster than their calculations had ever predicted. The crew's hope began to erode, grain by grain. Food became a desperate illusion. Barrels of salted pork rotted in the stifling humidity. Bread was long gone. Flour turned to damp paste. Men scavenged for anything that resembled sustenance. Dried fish, scraps of rice, gnawed leather scraps, crumbs of hardened cheese. Antonio Pigafetta later recounted how sailors boiled sawdust, softened leather, even moldy belts, trying to stave off starvation. Then came the scourge no one could fight: scurvy. At first, bleeding gums and loose teeth, then weakness that stole their strength, swelling that twisted bodies and minds. Every day, the ship's morgue grew heavier by 2 or 3 wrapped bundles. On some vessels, sailors were too weak to perform their duties. Ships barely floated, held aloft by sheer stubbornness. Officers took over the helm, carpenters replaced helmsmen, navigators cooked meager meals, if one could call it that. All of this unfolded in suffocating silence. No storms roared. No thunder broke the monotony. Only the creak of masts, distant bird calls, and the ragged breaths of the dying. Antonio Pigafetta wrote that during the entire crossing of this ocean, they never saw a single large island to set foot upon. Once, a faint strip of land appeared on the horizon, but it was barren and surrounded by jagged reefs, a cruel trap offering no salvation. Weeks stretched into months. Days folded into each other until even the officers lost track of time. Navigators struggled to maintain course, but their instruments faltered, readings diverged. Calculations relied on speed, wind angle, and the sun, but a single mile's error each day multiplied into hundreds over months. No one knew how far from their destination they truly were. Ferdinand Magellan kept his composure. The commander moved quietly among the decks, speaking only in brief, precise commands. Outwardly, he was firm but calm, masking any doubt. Yet Antonio Pigafetta noted exhaustion creeping into the captain's eyes, a shadow of the burden he bore. He ruled not by fear, but by example. Silent when all was silent, speaking only to inspire or direct. Then, in early March of 1521, after 3 months and 1 day since leaving the Strait of Magellan, a shout pierced the weary air. "Land on the horizon!" At first, disbelief rippled through the crew, but soon the outline was undeniable. A living island, lush and green, fringed by beaches and fresh-water springs. Exhausted men stared in disbelief as the island of Guam, one of the Mariana Islands, drew near. They plunged into the surf, drinking until they collapsed on the sand. Coconut palms were felled, roots torn free, fruit plucked in wild desperation. In a single day, the crew regained more strength than they had in weeks. But relief came with a price. Several did not survive the shore's brief haven. The harsh ocean still held its toll, and the journey's grim consequences were far from over. What would become of these men, trapped between the unforgiving sea and the fragile hope of land? Magellan's destiny, and that of his crew, hinged on choices made beneath unyielding skies. The voyage was far from its end. If you want to dive deeper into stories of fateful decisions and human endurance, join us here at Quiet History. What does it truly take to survive when the ocean itself turns into an endless prison? How do men push forward when their bodies scream for relief and their minds wrestle with fear? After months adrift, the fleet under Ferdinand Magellan finally reached land, but the fight for survival was far from over. Their bodies faltered, unable to handle the sudden shift from starvation to nourishment. Yet some of the crew began to awaken from their living nightmare. The island was inhabited, alive with unknown faces and untold dangers. The first contact was tense. Suspicion, sparked by a stolen boat, nearly ignited a deadly clash. But fate held back the violence. Water, food, rest, the bare essentials of life, became the fragile prize the men desperately sought. They claimed them, but the ocean's silence and hunger still clung to their souls. Behind them lay the greatest maritime crossing in history, the vast Pacific Ocean conquered without pause, without landfall, without storm. Only endless quiet and gnawing hunger. The crossing stretched from South America to the islands of Asia, but the real challenge was waiting just beyond the horizon. After their brief respite on Guam, the remaining 3 ships pressed westward, chasing the elusive Moluccas. Mid-March of 1521 brought them to a giant island they would later call Samar. They landed on a deserted shore, cloaked in foliage and palms, neighboring the island of Homonhon. On the 16th of March, a fragile camp was set up to rest the exhausted men, gather food, and repair the battered vessels. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and doubt. The unknown was about to reveal itself. Soon, bamboo boats approached, carrying islanders armed with spears, yet showing no hostility. Their language was a mystery, but Enrique from Malacca, Magellan's slave and servant, bridged the gap. His understanding of a nearby dialect unlocked communication, a cautious dialogue between 2 worlds on the edge of collision. They learned of Raja Kalambu, ruler of the nearby island of Limasawa, a man of respect, commerce, and dialogue. Magellan acted swiftly, steering his fleet toward this new opportunity. Kalambu greeted them warmly, exchanging gifts of cloth, metal, and trinkets for food, water, and guides. From suspicion to alliance in a heartbeat. On the 31st of March, the first Mass was held openly on Limassaua's shore, a momentous rite witnessed by Europeans and local leaders alike. For Magellan, it symbolized more than survival. It was a claim, not wielded by sword, but scribed in faith and diplomacy. The dawn of a new world was unfolding beneath their eyes. From Limassaua, the fleet sailed to Cebu, an island teeming with commerce and power. Here ruled Raja Humabon, shrewd, pragmatic, and influential. Magellan knew this alliance was key. Without it, his expedition's ambitions would crumble against the archipelago's currents of power. He staged an elaborate reception showcasing European might. Artillery roared, muskets flashed, gifts of arms and mirrors dazzled. Humabon, awed by this technology and eager to consolidate his rule among rival chiefs, agreed not only to alliance, but to baptism. The stakes had never been higher. On the 14th of April, Raja Humabon was baptized, a gesture that went beyond faith, sealing political fate. Every choice rippled forward, irreversible and fraught. But the true test was still to come. The voyage had been long and brutal. The winds vanished or erupted as storms. Food spoiled before they could eat it. Water ran dangerously low. Scurvy and plague ravaged the crew relentlessly. No ports allowed respite, not Muscat, not Mozambique. Fear of Portuguese capture forced them to sail on without pause. Only once, in Portuguese Cape Verde, did they dare land clandestinely, disguised as merchants struck by a storm. The deception unraveled. Some were captured. But Juan Sebastian Elcano refused to wait. With the ship worn to its limits, every moment of delay was a death sentence. On the If you want to uncover more tales where destiny hangs by a thread, join Quiet History. The ocean's whispers still echo, and the past awaits. What does it mean to challenge the very limits of the known world? How far can desperation push the human spirit when faced with the vast unknown? Juan Sebastian Elcano and his crew embarked on a journey that would shatter centuries of belief. But at what cost? The ship Victoria, battered and worn, carried more than just cargo. It held the weight of history itself. The Victoria's sails were pierced countless times, the hull groaning with every gust of wind. Yet it delivered nearly 26 tons of cloves to Spain, a haul large enough to cover the expedition's staggering expenses. But the true treasure was not the sacks of spice. It was the battered souls aboard, clutching diaries, maps, astronomical observations, and knowledge that had existed only as speculation until now. The world, they proved, was truly round, and it could be circumnavigated. The journey had started under the Spanish flag, led by a Portuguese navigator, and was completed by a Basque captain. Those who returned were not heroes singing songs of triumph. They were shadows of men. Their faces were etched with scurvy, their bodies ravaged by hunger and disease, their movements slow, each step a testament to the relentless grip of 3 years at sea, their survival hanging by the fragile thread of water in barrels and the fickle breath of the wind. When Victoria finally entered the port of Seville, the survivors did not cheer. They carried the silence of the impossible within them. Their arrival was met not with fanfare, but with cold officials from the Seville Chamber of Indian Affairs and royal representatives, their eyes sharp with suspicion. These men were to verify the truth behind tales that defied reason and to assess the precious cargo. What followed were grueling hours of questioning, repeated accounts of the route, first for merchants, then for the emperor's court. Juan Sebastian Elcano was summoned to Valladolid, where Emperor Charles V awarded him a personal coat of arms, emblazoned with a globe and the Latin motto, Primus circumdediste me, you first circled me. Along with honor came a royal pension, a formal acknowledgment of his achievement. Yet Elcano's health was broken, and he would die a few years later during another sea campaign in the southern reaches of the Pacific Ocean, never reaching old age. Of the 18 Spaniards who returned, many succumbed soon after, not to wounds from battle, but to diseases, starvation, and internal decay. Those who survived became objects of relentless scrutiny and interrogation. Some, like Francesco Alba, pressed on with naval careers. Others vanished back into obscurity. Only a few, like Antonio Pigafetta, left behind detailed chronicles. The Venetians' meticulous records, written almost from the expedition's start, were later woven into a near-daily narrative that became a cornerstone of knowledge on the age of discovery. Pigafetta's manuscript, originally penned in Italian and later translated into French, offered Europe its first systematic descriptions of the peoples of the Philippines, the Moluccas, and Oceania. It transformed shadowy myths into tangible realities, opening eyes to cultures and landscapes previously unexplored and unknown. The geographical impact of the expedition was not immediately apparent, but in the decades that followed, the implications became undeniable. The globe, once a realm of conjecture and legend, was now a measurable space defined by routes and coordinates. The ocean ceased to be a boundary. It became a corridor connecting distant worlds. The voyage of Victoria proved, beyond doubt, that the East could be reached by sailing west. This revelation altered the course of empires and economies forever. For Spain, the expedition was both a symbolic victory over Portugal and an economic milestone. Despite half the fleet lost and half the crew perished, the delivery of cloves aboard the Victoria nearly offset the monumental costs. But the true prize was strategic, the opening of a perilous yet viable route to the riches of the East. Portugal's reaction was swift and severe. News of the Circumnavigation stabbed at their pride and claim to eastern dominance. In the following year, the Portuguese seized the ship Trinidad and captured its crew, sending some to Guam. They intensified their naval patrols along the East African coast, determined to choke off Spain's newfound path. The decisions made aboard those fragile ships echoed far beyond the waves. Lives were gambled, alliances tested, and empires shifted on the tides of ambition and fear. The voyage of Victoria was no triumphant parade. It was a brutal reckoning, a testament to human endurance in a moment when irreversible choices reshaped the map of the world forever. What remained was a legacy of knowledge and a future forever altered. To follow in their wake is to confront the same questions. How far will we go? What price will we pay? And what truths lie beyond the horizon? If you found this journey through history gripping, join Quiet History for for more explorations of moments that changed the world. What happens when empires collide over uncharted waters? When two great maritime powers risk everything to claim distant islands? The fierce struggle to control the Moluccas, the Spice Islands, was more than just a battle for territory. It was a clash of visions and wills. The Pope's endorsement of these claims only fueled the fire, turning the seas into a chessboard of power and peril. Yet this conflict was just the prelude to something far more transformative, an irreversible shift in how humanity saw the world. But what price would be paid for this new understanding? Imagine a world fragmented and uncertain, where maps were sketches of myth and guesswork. Suddenly, a daring expedition changes everything. Ferdinand Magellan's voyage was a brutal, relentless journey filled with death and betrayal. He himself never saw the end, falling in battle on the island of Mactan, far from home, his dreams crushed by conflict with the Portuguese crown and his own stubborn resolve. Yet, ironically, it was his absence that immortalized him. His name became a beacon, etched into a treacherous strait at the southern tip of South America, two luminous star clouds in the southern sky, and above all, the idea that the Earth was a single, continuous sphere. This was no mere voyage, it was a revolution in human thought. But could the world ever return to the way it was before? Before Magellan, the world was a shattered puzzle, disconnected, uncertain, and confined. Afterward, it became a measurable, navigable entity connected by relentless oceans. The path he carved was treacherous and exhausting, but it was real and lasting. This new route became the highway for explorers, merchants, scientists, and map-makers. Magellan's expedition marked a point of no return, a watershed moment that redefined exploration itself. The consequences of that journey rippled through history, reshaping power, knowledge, and ambition. Yet, what dark shadows lurked behind this great leap forward? Magellan's legacy is a complex tapestry of faith, fury, and unforgiving determination. His obstinance and ruthlessness were as much a part of his influence as his vision. His death did not silence the journey. Instead, it crystallized the idea that the Earth could be circled, conquered, and understood as one whole. This was a seismic shift, turning theory into lived reality. The map of the world gained coherence, and humanity stood at the dawn of a new age. But every step forward carried a cost, a price paid in blood, fear, and irreversible choices. What consequences would echo through generations because of this fragile, relentless pursuit? The treaty, signed in Zaragoza, tried to carve peace between Spain and Portugal, momentarily drawing lines in the ocean's vastness. But those lines were more than political boundaries. They were marks of a new global order struggling to emerge from chaos. The expedition that began as a quest for spices morphed into a journey that shattered old worldviews and forged new ones. Magellan may have perished, but his voyage became the symbol of a future no one could ignore. The world was forever changed, caught in the tumult of decisions made at sea, decisions whose consequences would ripple forward with relentless momentum. Are we still living in the shadow of those choices? The expedition was not the end, but the point of no return. The moment when exploration transformed from uncertain myth into measurable reality. The seas, once feared and fragmented, became pathways to new worlds, ideas, and power. The era of discovery surged forward, driven by the knowledge that the Earth was one interconnected whole, ready to be traversed. Magellan's name, etched in straits and stars, became a symbol of this irreversible change. And as history surged on, the question remained, who would dare to follow these treacherous waves into the unknown next? Join Quiet History to unfold these stories and witness the human spirit's indomitable will to explore.